Well, despite U.S. efforts to limit foreign access to AI chips, China has found workarounds either through front companies, reports of smugglers, or with help of U.S. chips specifically designed to skirt sanctions.
The U.S. has just been blindsided by China's latest move, and no one saw it coming. China has managed to sidestep U.S. sanctions in a way that's left the world stunned. But what exactly did they do, and how is the U.S. going to respond? Could this be the start of a new global tech war? Let's dive in. The U.S. tried to slow down China in chip production, but this hasn't been successful so far. Chip production refers to the process of manufacturing semiconductor chips, which are critical components in modern electronic devices. These chips, also known as integrated circuits or ICs, power various technologies, including computers, smartphones, data centers, and vehicles. The chip production process involves several steps, including designing circuits, fabricating silicon wafers, etching precise patterns, and assembling the final product. Advanced chips are key to emerging technologies like artificial intelligence, 5G networks, and electric vehicles, making them a critical aspect of national security and technological dominance. The chip-making industry is a billion-dollar enterprise that has grown exponentially over the years. For example, in 2018, the worldwide annual sales revenue of semiconductors was over $481 billion. This increased to $574.1 billion in 2022. Basically, any country that leads the chip-making industry is to be feared both economically and technologically. As of 2024, American companies such as Intel, NVIDIA, and Broadcom are among the top 5 leaders in the semiconductor industry. Best believe that the U.S. would like to keep it this way, or even take it a step further, because Asian companies such as the South Korean Samsung and the Taiwanese TSM are also among the top 5 leaders. The TSM, for one, is the U.S.'s biggest challenge given that they depend on this company for their production capabilities. The U.S. doesn't exactly have issues with Taiwan. But seeing that they are the closest thing to China, this is where the problem starts. You see, China is actively looking for ways to make a big name in the market through companies like Huawei Technologies. Hence, the U.S. imposed sanctions on China's chip industry to maintain its technological edge, especially in advanced fields like AI and defense technologies. China has been rapidly advancing in chip development, and the U.S. fears that they might close the technological gap, potentially challenging U.S. dominance in these strategic areas.
Of course, there's the related issue of subsidies and whether we want to compete with a Chinese market where workers don't have complete freedom. We've got the competition angle tied in with defense, and it's all very, very complicated.
But why are they so against China's technological advancements? Why has the U.S. chosen to work freely with Korea and Taiwan without sanctioning them, while taking a more conservative approach towards China? Well, the answer lies in China's potential security threat. The U.S. fears that China, as a major player in chip-making, will bolster its military and espionage capabilities. This has been a problem since China introduced its Comprehensive National Security Strategy in 2014. Which aims to establish itself as the world's foremost science and technology superpower. The U.S. doesn't believe this strategy is not without potential security hostilities. Some countries have a thing to say about this, but before we hear them, let us see some of these sanctions placed on China by America. They include prohibiting sales of critical servicing equipment and software to Chinese companies like Huawei. The U.S. also pressured foreign chip-making firms, like Dutch company ASML and others in Japan and South Korea, to stop supplying China with advanced chip-making technologies. These companies risk losing access to the U.S. market if they continue trading with China. The overarching goal of these sanctions is to protect U.S. national security and maintain a lead in critical technologies, but they also have the effect of reshaping global supply chains and influencing international relations. But even though the U.S. and its allies have imposed these strict restrictions, they haven't been entirely successful.
China continues to dominate critical industries, despite continued efforts by the US from a breakthrough in chip-making technology to its stronghold on the rare earths market. The West is really struggling to catch up with China's critical might.
The way China has been circumventing them has been pretty interesting. First off, China is not happy about these sanctions. Mao Ning, the spokeswoman of the Chinese Ministry of Foreign Affairs, said during a news conference in Beijing, quote, "The U.S. overstretching the concept of national security, setting barriers and undermining normal cooperation between the two countries." But China is not just wailing about the sanctions. They are instead adopting means to circumvent them. For example, Chinese companies such as Huawei are still managing to get their hands on crucial components through strategic partnerships. Companies like Pengxinzu, Suisure Technology, Qingdao CN, and others are suspected of being part of a hidden network helping Huawei get their hands on restricted chips, according to the South China Morning Post. This issue was highlighted by House China Select Committee Chairman John Molinar and Ranking Member Raja Krishnamurthy in a letter to Commerce Secretary Gina Raimondo. The most recent scare for the U.S. is Huawei's newest smartphone, Pura 70, which features a 7-nanometer chip from Semiconductor Manufacturing International Corp. This has prompted calls for more severe sanctions. We must continue in our efforts to deny Huawei and similar firms the ability to access U.S. technology, wrote Molinar and Krishnamurthy. Nevertheless, China is also advancing its chip-making technologies so that it won't have to rely too much on external production factors.
China has announced a significant advancement in its semiconductor technology with the development of a new laser-based immersion lithography machine.
This type of lithography equipment, as noted by experts, is the most advanced way of making chips.
Lithography machines, the most advanced type of lithography equipment that's needed to make every single advanced processor chip that.
But aside from China doing business with local manufacturing companies or creating their own technologies, experts are worried about another way China is using to get around chip export controls: smuggling.
Smuggling. The New York Times a couple months ago reported about a large flea market in Shenzhen where you could buy, as much as $100 million worth of smuggled chip.
At least 10,000 chips are smuggled into China every year. But this is a relatively small number since a chip-making industry uses millions of these chips yearly. However, while a few thousand chips might not seem like a big deal, the smuggling of entire servers is a red flag. These servers contain powerful chips that are highly sought after in China. The goal was to slow down China's development of advanced semiconductors, which the US worries could boost China's military capabilities. However, it's been tough to enforce these rules because Chinese firms have been spotted accessing NVIDIA's 100 and H100 chips through cloud services like AWS. There is also another method of dodging the many American sanctions that need to be critically analyzed. In fact, this can be a game changer for China, except they've yet to fully explore it. You see, should China decide to retaliate the way the US has responded to its technological advancements, this will spell trouble. Though the US remains a leader in cutting-edge semiconductor technology, China holds considerable power in other parts of the semiconductor supply chain, particularly in the rare earth elements crucial for chip production.
Rare earth materials needed for everything, from military technology to everyday consumer tech products. And the Department of Defense is spending millions.
With China responsible for 60% of the world's rare earth extraction and over 85% of processing, it plays a dominant role. While China hasn't fully utilized its rare earth dominance as a political tool, it has hinted at the possibility. In response to U.S. export restrictions, China has curbed its exports of gallium and germanium, signaling the potential for further escalation. So, how is the U.S. preparing for all these possibilities, and how do they plan to stop China from dodging its sanctions? On August 9, 2022, President Joe Biden passed the CHIPS and Science Act into law.
Of the United States.
We're going to make sure the supply chain for America begins in America. That's why we came together to pass the bipartisan CHIPS and Science Act.
The act is a U.S. federal statute aimed at strengthening domestic semiconductor production and research. The act allocates approximately $280 billion to enhance the United States semiconductor industry, including $52.7 billion specifically for chip manufacturing and innovation. This includes $39 billion in subsidies for domestic chip production, 25% tax credits for manufacturing equipment costs, and $13 billion dedicated to research and workforce development. The legislation aims to bolster U.S. supply chain resilience while countering China's growing influence in the tech sector. A few months later, in October 2022, the Biden administration implemented export controls to restrict China's access to advanced U.S. semiconductors and technologies, aiming to preserve U.S. technological dominance and address security concerns. These measures, which focused on advanced chips and supercomputing components, were further tightened in 2023. Then, to stop the servers from being smuggled, experts suggest that the U.S. should put GPS trackers on them so it can see where they go. The U.S. government should also make cloud companies report more about who's using their services. This would help close the loopholes in the rules that are supposed to stop China from getting these chips. China currently controls 24% of global production capacity for 50 to 180 nanometer chips, and that share is expected to rise to 50% by 2030 as the country heavily invests in mature node manufacturing. Concerns are growing that Chinese state-run chip makers might oversupply the market, disrupting global production. To counter this, the Biden administration has proposed increasing tariffs on semiconductors to 50% by 2025, while the U.S. Department of Commerce is actively evaluating the nation's reliance on mature node chips. These efforts aim to safeguard U.S. semiconductor security and competitiveness amidst the growing influence of China. The U.S. is also working tirelessly to reduce its dependence on China for rare earth material production and processing.
Process it. Now, currently they've got to process that in China, Tyler and Kelly, but next year hopefully they'll process here. So we are still reliant.
The U.S. and its allies are building their own supply chain.
We're going to be producing at least 50% more than we do today.
Lastly, what do other countries think about these restrictions posed by the U.S. on China? To put it simply, other countries that are big players in the chip-making industry are not happy with the restrictions. There is growing dissatisfaction among U.S. allies such as the Netherlands, Japan, and South Korea over Washington's pressure to impose tighter restrictions on semiconductor technology exports to China. While the U.S. justifies these measures under national security, leaders of companies like ASML, a Dutch chip equipment giant, have expressed that the restrictions seem more economically motivated. ASML's CEO warned that proving national security concerns is becoming increasingly difficult, and opposition to U.S.-led restrictions is growing. ASML also reports that China accounts for about 20% of its revenue. Hence, it won't make any sense if they continue to block China's technological advancements. Basically, these restrictions have strained trade relationships, especially as countries like Japan and South Korea have deep economic ties with China, a crucial market. South Korea, for example, recorded a trade deficit with China in 2023, primarily due to U.S.-requested export restrictions on semiconductors. Critics argue that the U.S. is using economic coercion under the guise of security, forcing allies to adopt restrictive policies that hurt their own economies. Despite emphasizing alliances, the U.S. has offered no compensation or market access to offset the financial damage its allies are experiencing. This has led to increasing discontent among allies, which ultimately harms both their economies and global supply chains, while the U.S. has yet to achieve its goal of curbing China's technological development. Some experts also feel it is unnecessary to go to war with China, considering they have other domestic issues to worry about.
Yeah, my own view is we don't really need to go out of our way to halt China's economic advancement.
But whatever anyone feels, the U.S. is not backing out from this fight. The semiconductor export controls between the U.S. and China could have major unintended consequences for both nations. U.S. chip companies face financial risks from losing access to the Chinese market, with potential annual losses of $83 billion in sales and 124,000 jobs. U.S. semiconductor equipment firms, which heavily rely on Chinese sales, are especially vulnerable. Meanwhile, China's efforts to create a self-sufficient semiconductor industry have accelerated as companies like Huawei have started developing advanced chips domestically, bypassing U.S. restrictions. As the semiconductor industry moves beyond Moore's Law, China could focus on alternative technologies such as memory-centric computing and system-level optimizations, which may allow them to catch up with the U.S. even without advanced lithography. This shift could weaken U.S. sanctions and further isolate the U.S. from the global tech economy. Policymakers in the U.S. must adapt their strategies to address these emerging challenges by refining regulations, monitoring China's progress, and exploring new rare earth supply chains to maintain a competitive edge. Balancing control with global influence will be key to ensuring long-term success in the semiconductor market. What are your thoughts on all this? Do you think this marks the start of a new Cold War? Let us know in the comments.